We thought there was a stair, there isn't. It's very interesting. How many people face these difficult situations where things are very different from what they would otherwise expect? I think we're about ready.
Okay.
Let's start. Thank you.
Now, is that better? Okay. This is not a sort of group that I normally talk to. As an engineer, I normally corrupt or pervert things that human behavior people talk about, simplify the problem down to a few numbers and that sort of thing. But in this particular case, I'm going to talk about an event that occurred in New Zealand on the 22nd of February. But before I go there, I first want to acknowledge the people who invited me or asked. I participate in these programs on a regular basis. I didn't expect to come back to this one simply because of the distance to travel. And then we had the event, and the opportunity to come and present here sort of availed itself, so I took advantage of it. But as I said, it's not a normal sort of event that we had. Now, I'll click over to some of the details. The event actually, from a technical point of view, was considered an aftershock. On the 4th of September, we had our first major earthquake for a number of years in Christchurch, New Zealand. It was a magnitude 7.1, occurred on a previously unknown fault, as many of the major events do seem to occur on unknown faults. So if you don't believe that you live on a fault line and you think you're safe, that may in fact not be the case. But in this particular case, on the 22nd, the original event occurred at some 3 o'clock in the morning. I, like most others, were woken up to the event, and there was no one killed in the event, and there were no major structural collapses. A few homes, unreinforced buildings had trouble. There's a large amount of damage, but no one was killed. The February event on the 22nd occurred at effectively during the lunch hour, 12:51 in the afternoon. As I was sitting underneath my desk waiting for the shaking to stop, the one thing about it was people were very attuned to what to do in the event of an earthquake because we'd had so many other aftershocks along the way. So most people were underneath their desk or taking refuge somewhere during the particular event. Probably saved a number of people, actually, having had this recent experience. It was a magnitude of 6.3, which is not a tremendous amount for an earthquake. You know, it's a log scale on the Richter scale. It goes up quite substantially. But what made this one different is that it was so close to the central city, and it was very, very shallow as earthquakes go. It gave ground motion several times larger than what we specifically designed for in New Zealand, although we do design for these events. There were, as it says here, 10 kilometers southwest and only 5 kilometers deep. 181 people lost their lives. Most of those were in 2 building collapses. This happens to be one of the buildings in the background that did collapse. The other building, which killed more people, was nothing but a pile of rubble. This one here, although it's largely a pile of rubble, there were a number of people who were brought out of this building by the urban search and rescue alive. 181 fatalities, 130 some were in buildings. There were a number killed on the street. There were a few others, I think about 15 that died on a city bus when a brick facade fell on it as well. But the buildings of interest in this study are 3 of them that suffered significant damage or collapse to their stairways. The people went to the doorway and literally found no stairs. So that's specifically what I'm going to be talking about. This is one of those buildings. It's called the Forsyth Bar Building. By definition, it is a high-rise building. It's too high to reach with a fire service ladder. It's 19 stories. There's retail on the ground floor. It's located in the central business district. There's 4 stories of car parking, which makes up this portion of the building. And then you've got 14 levels of leased office spaces. There were no major injuries or fatalities within this building, but the evacuation was by crane some 4 hours later, or after 9/11. one of the people in the building decided that they wanted to have an emergency evacuation system, and he was a mountaineer, and so he had abseiling equipment in the building, and from the lower 3 or 4 levels, a number of people went out on a rope. Wow. So they did, and these are people who are not, although the guy who was leading it was a mountaineer, the people who went out on the rope were not. So that's a pretty catastrophic behavior to go through in this sort of event. Now, the one thing about this particular building that made it unique compared to the other two is what they were able to see out their windows once you get up so high. Now, the unfortunate part of this building is that we could not enter it because there's no stairway. You don't think about, oh, well, we'll go in. That was my original intent, was to go in to the building. The problem is that we could only get up to essentially that height. This car park here occupies more than the base of the building's, or the high-rise portion's footprint. We were only able to get up onto the top of it, whereas the photos I'm taking were somewhere above this height. But what you see here is that they could actually see this collapsed building, what's called the PGC building, and they could see that the cathedral itself, which is a very iconic structure in the center of town, had also suffered substantial damage. So they were well aware of what was going on around them, and the fact that they were still alive. They were, although trapped in the building, they were not, the building had not collapsed around them apart from the stairway, but they were very quickly aware that they were part of a much bigger event that was overtaxing the system. Now, in terms of what the stairs look like, when we finally got in there about 60 days later, this is a shot looking up the stairway. This is the floor landing, and I'll get to in a minute into how it collapsed. But these stairs were removed very early on. One thing that happened is that there was an occupant who was missing. Nobody knew where she was. They brought in rescue dogs, and 3 dogs sat on the same location for the stairway. So they felt pretty confident that they had found this missing person. They tore the stairways out, and she was in fact not there. She had gone out to lunch and died somewhere else from debris in a strip mall area. She'd gone out to lunch, they assume, and she was killed somewhere else, and they found her a number of days later. When you have 181 people, you start pulling these bodies out, they don't release identities, they don't even guess at it, they wait until they can verify them via DNA or other more exact means, dental records. And so it was some time before they realized that she was not actually in the building. As I said, no one died in the building. There was no one in the stairway, apparently, or they wouldn't have made it. What actually happened, this is more from somewhat of a structural point of view. The stairways themselves sit on what are C-sections. This is the floor slab. It's what I've got. It's got the stairway. You've got a blow up of this section. You have the floor slab here. There's either an I or C section incorporated in the slab. We didn't tear it apart at this point. And it's connected through rebar at this end, and then it simply sits on a ledge over here. Now this length here is about 75 millimeters is all it is, about 3 inches. The inner story drift in this particular case, as I said, the ground motions were very large. It exceeded what they expected. They believe what happened is that the floors moved closer together. That failed the stairway in the middle, actually made it shorter. It then went back the other way on the next wave, and it dropped the stairway. These are about 12 tons apiece. So really, you drop one of them, and you can take out the whole lot. And that's effectively what happened in this building. There literally, from the 14th floor down, there was nothing left until you got down to about the 3rd floor, and then there was nothing but a pile. That's just more details about the stairs that aren't necessarily important. The other building was, another one of the buildings is the Clarendon Towers. This is politically a nightmare. We've not been able to get into the building. They believe that this particular structure could come down completely in the event that they get another major aftershock. There's structural reasons for that, and it's a potential to pancake down. So we haven't been able to get into here. But in this particular case, there was retail on the ground and 1st floor. The rest of it was leased office space. Again, no major injuries or fatalities.